So we want to bring in Utah Senator Mike Lee. He is a Tea Party Republican.
And welcome to the program. You know, you wrote an op-ed for the Washington Times, and I want to read it. It begins like this. While Washington is preoccupied with the so-called fiscal cliff, little attention has been given to the fiscal avalanche that'll occur if we continue down an unsustainable long-term path, causing markets to turn sour on U.S. debt and leading to a spike in interest rates. You're looking at the very long-term picture. They're just trying to get a little budget deal done here, but you're real worried about what, if they don't do this right now, what it means for the longer term. Tell us about that avalanche.
Well, you know, the thing about the cliff is we know exactly when it's coming. You can see a cliff. You can see when you're going to hit it. An avalanche is a little bit different. You know when the conditions are there, when it might happen, but you have no timing as to the exact moment that it's going to occur. And so that's what we need to be worried about. There will come a moment at some point in the next few years when people will no longer buy U.S. Treasury instruments, at least not at these unbelievably low rates we have today. And once that trend starts to reverse itself, we're going to be in a world of hurt.
I've been calling it the curse of the bond market, because interest rates are so low, because this government can borrow money so cheaply and so easily, it gives some political cover to Washington, to policymakers. They've been able to let this go on for a year longer than it should have, simply because interest rates are so low. And rates are so low because we are still we're still the best game in town. Other countries have bigger problems than we do in terms of their financial problems. But you know, these rates are still. We were worried about this last year, 2 years ago. These rates are so low. There's no sign they're going to turn around anytime soon.
Well, it's a little bit like saying, you know, I didn't look both ways when I crossed the street yesterday and I didn't get hit, and I did it the day before and I didn't get hit. Sooner or later, the piper has to be paid. Sooner or later, these things are going to have consequences, and they won't be pleasant.
Senator, I want to turn to the budget negotiations going on Capitol Hill. There's this issue of that famous tax pledge sponsored by Grover Norquist. Today, the Wall Street Journal editorial board, conservative to say the least, seemed to throw in the towel, providing maybe some cover for some Republicans here. Let me read you what they said. They said, if taxes are going up anyway because the Bush tax rates expire and Republicans can stop them from going up as much as they otherwise would, then pledge takers deserve some credit for that. Mr. Norquist says it violates his pledge to eliminate deductions without lowering rates, but at the current economic and political moment, it is also a service if Republicans prevent tax rates from going up. So in other words, you know, he's providing some cover from there. Is this debate over now? Have Republicans effectively caved on the idea of raising revenue?
I don't think Republicans have caved on anything related to taxes, but we do have to remember, Will, that it is possible to bring in more revenue without raising taxes. Anytime you stimulate economic growth, that's going to bring in more revenue. I want more revenue because I want more economic growth. That's the best way to bring in more revenue, to fund government programs.
I guess, Senator Ron Brownstein from National Journal, I guess the critical question here is, what is your leverage? If there is a stalemate, all of the Bush tax cuts expire and rates go up for everyone, what is your leverage to prevent an increase in rates, at least for those at the very top, as the president and all Democrats are demanding?
Well, that's one of the problems that we have. One of the reasons why we're calling this the fiscal cliff is because if we do nothing, then we go off that cliff. If we do nothing, then current law requires all those rates to go up. And so that may be what the Wall Street Journal is referring to, is the simple fact that a default operation with no intervention by Congress will result in a rate increase.
No, they are also clearly saying in that editorial that if Republicans can negotiate a deal in which rates went up somewhat, but not all the way back to the 39.6 top rate under President Clinton, that they would deserve credit for doing that. They seem to be suggesting there's a third way in which you would make up the money by increasing rates somewhat and getting the rest by limiting deductions. Do you think that's an idea that's going to take root among Senate Republicans?
Perhaps so. You know, I haven't seen the editorial. I don't know specifically beyond what you've described what they're saying, but it's worth taking a look at.
But there is room there, you think, for raising rates not as much as letting the Bush tax rates expire completely and also closing loopholes and reducing deductions? You think that might be a fertile ground? Is that what you're saying?
Well, I don't think that's a good idea. I think it's a horrible idea to raise taxes on anyone. Look, for rates to go up in this economy, is going to be a bad thing. It's going to kill jobs. Even if we just allow the top two rates to go up, as planned by current law, we're going to lose 700,000 jobs. Now, we have to remember, these are not CEO jobs. These are not top 1% jobs. These are people who are living paycheck to paycheck, hardworking Americans who are going to lose their jobs. We don't worry about raising taxes on the rich because we're worried about the rich. We worry about that because of what that's going to do to the poor.
Hey, Senator, this is Will Kane. So listen, before I got into this game of telling people my wonderful opinion on various topics, I was in the business world. I bought and sold businesses, and every time I did that, there were two parties to the interaction. There was a party and a counterparty. I didn't get to just go dictate my terms. So now I hear you saying, in order to make a deal to avoid, as you said, this potential fiscal avalanche, you'll give a little ground on taxes. Are you getting a sense from your counterparty, the Democrats, that they are going to give ground on spending, specifically on the main drivers of our debt and deficit, entitlements? Are you feeling that give?
I'm not feeling that give so far, and I do want to point out that so far the only proposal on the table, the only idea that anyone has thrown out from the Democratic side, is to allow the top two marginal income tax rates, the top two income tax rates to go up. And that's what we know will kill 700,000 jobs. Now, that proposal, to my knowledge, is not accompanied by any long-term structural spending reform. And that's one of the things that's so troubling about this, because at the end of the day, we have to remember it's not really a revenue problem that we have so much as it is a spending problem.
Congressman, we heard so much about sequestration in terms of defense cuts. And so what about that being on the table as well? Because I get entitlements. I get the whole issue when it comes to taxes. When you look at the amount of money that this country spends on defense, it is significant. And so is it also an area Republicans say, look, we can make cuts there as well if you want cuts on entitlements?
Absolutely. Look, we need to make cuts anywhere we can, and there are efficiencies that we can find in military spending. That doesn't mean that the kind of sequestration called for by the Budget Control Act of 2011 is the way to do it. Those cuts fall disproportionately on the Department of Defense, and I think that's a problem. So I've got a bill in the form of my Cut, Cap, and Balance Act of 2012 that deals with that makes sequestration unnecessary because it makes more cuts, some of which are in defense, others in other areas. I've also got another piece of legislation that I haven't yet introduced, but that I'm working on, is contain targeted cuts so that we don't have to carry out all of the cutting in the area of defense, or disproportionately in the area of defense.